Go. Hello, Manny. It's Monday, and you're back.
Yes,
Nice.
I got my full 7 hours last night, so I'm ready
Did
to go.
you? Wow.
You believe
I
that?
I can't think of the last time I got 7 hours sleep, man. That's impressive.
Oh, on a Sunday night, I watched the Squid Game like last couple episodes, and I was like, time for bed.
I have not watched that yet. I've heard a lot about it, but I have not watched it.
Gotta watch it. It's such a mind
All
fuck.
right, I'm like years behind. We're still on season 5 of Curb Your Enthusiasm. Like, so
Uh, you know what? It's 2021, so
is
I
it?
think
Is it? All right, good. Well, we've time stamped this for all the people that watch it later, which is good. So thank you so much for making the time. We were already talking that you don't have a huge amount of time, so we're already looking at a part 3. We know that. So we're going to get through as much as we can. And I want to just mention before we start that today's been a very weird day, and I may have to actually take a phone call, which I would feel incredibly rude doing. And in most circumstances, I wouldn't even know I got a phone call, but it might happen today, in which case Mark will jump in for a sec, ask a couple
listen.
questions, and
Mama was calling me too. I bounced, so no need to
yeah.
apologize.
All right. Well, let's pick it right up where we left off. Where we left off was you going, "Oh man, I got to tell you about In Vogue," and like, all
Oh,
right.
oh.
So let's start there, shall we?
Yes. So in Vogue, so I was kind of like well, I was Babyface's engineer at the time, and I think I told you last time where, man, my goal was always to mix. That was my dream. The goal was always wanted to mix. But I started recording. I said recording engineer like all most of us mixers, and I was at Brandon's Way, which is Babyface's studio on Highland, and he had a mixer that he had been working with for forever. So it was Easter Sunday, and this En Vogue track came along, and I had recorded it, handed it off to the mixer. He mixes it. They weren't crazy about it, and as Babyface is walking out on I believe it must have been Friday night. He goes, "Hey, you want to mix this song over the weekend? It's Easter. I'm gonna go to Tahoe or wherever he was going." I'm like, "Fuck yeah, yes." And I mixed it, and Sylvia Roan on a Monday calls me. He's like, "Wait, who are you? What's this is great. This is an amazing mix. What we're gonna keep this." And here's this kid, right? That I didn't even know who Sylvia Roan was at the time, and she and then that started so many problems with the mixer that Kenny had at the time, and which look, I completely understand it. You have this kid coming in and now taking a mix that you had done, and I'm sure that can be very, you know, not cool for anybody to go through. So I totally understand. Don't blame anybody for taking the actions they took, and from that point on, it was kind of hell for me being there, and I had an opportunity. Yeah, he put me through hell, and then I had an opportunity to go work for the Braxtons, Tony Braxton's sisters, and to mix some of that stuff. And I told Kenny, I said, look, that I wanted to pursue that, and I went. I never, I think that could have been some of my last recording sessions, because
Wow.
from that point on, I never looked back, and it was the mixer and I became, we're still, I don't know if we're friends, but it was all good. But it was a great opportunity for me to impress Babyface and myself, and I remember working on the Easter Sunday. Man, I spent 2 days on the mix and not knowing what I was really doing, but just following your gut, right? And and that
Yeah.
kind of started my not started, but kind of gave me more confidence. It's all about the confidence, right?
Yeah, man. That's awesome. And it's also an interesting thing to touch on while we're here is that there are always people gunning for you. And if you lose the gig because someone else's mix was better, man, you can't be mad about that. If you lose it because someone screwed you or talked about you behind your back, like there are plenty of ways a gig can go away that are not cool. But to
Yep.
lose it purely based on the mix,
Yeah. It's all fair game. Like you said, you said it best. We all have this big bullseye on our back, and everyone's gunning for that. And in a way, that's kind of exciting because it's a level playing field. Nowadays, a kid in the freaking with a laptop in mom's basement can you're can compete against someone that's been doing it for almost 30 years, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and that's an exciting thing for all of us, for them and us to stay sharp and do it because we love to do it, not because you know, not because we have the seniority of of being able to do it just because we've been doing it forever. So it's a level playing field, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, man. That's but that's really interesting that that sort of ended your time with Babyface
Yeah,
at that
yeah.
time. But, you know, I mean, moving on to the Braxtons, it's not terrible, is it? It's pretty good.
No, I got lucky, man. It was like, met some good producers and they were doing some great records and we're all young and naive and just wanted to do it for the greater good of, our careers in the future with audio. So for me, it's like, I was just dedicated. I was really focused. There's only one thing I wanted to do, and that was mixed records. I don't, didn't matter what records they were, just wanted to be in the studio working on artist music. That was my dream.
Well, and I've been thinking a lot about something you said the last time, which was that when you used to go to Guitar Center and mess around with the 4-track, but that
Yeah.
you would say, okay, I'm going to mix this so it makes me happy. All right, now I'm going to mix it so it makes me angry.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
that's it's like you can't tickle yourself, you know? Like I mean to really to make yourself feel something while mixing just using EQ on a 4-track. Like that's pretty badass.
Man. And it's like I remember like Dave Way back in the day. Him and I would talk about emotions and frequencies and all that. And I remember going back to my high school teacher, like how he, to this day it you know, blows my mind thinking of emotion based on frequencies, which is, it's kind of obvious to a lot of people. But when you really go a lot deeper on how you make the same song have a completely different emotion based on levels and frequencies without touching anything else, without, your stereo bus or getting complicated with processing or gain structure and any of that. I mean, the power that we have based on frequencies, how we can create an emotion, that's still really powerful. And now we have what we have to do is we have to be invisible, right? We don't have, I love when people don't notice who mixed it or any of that. We have to be almost like it's got to be what it's going to be, and our job is to kind of be invisible and hopefully create that emotion that the artists and producer are ultimately looking for.
And do you have like if you know you want to get a certain kind of emotion out of something, do you already have like something in your mind of what that EQ is going to look like, or is it just you know you're going to get there with EQ, and that's how you're going to do it?
I try to not look at frequencies, like especially in the world of like great looking GUIs and plugins, and you got to look for the frequency and stuff. And I'm kind of old school where if I'm mixing on the desk, if not mix, if when I'm mixing on the desk, I just reach for the frequency and I don't even look at it. I just
Right.
go emotion, right? And I think that I try to do that with plugins as well. When we do these seminars, panels, and stuff, we all do them all the time. One of the first things I always say is to give me a facial expression of what 1K means to you, right? And everyone has the same fucking. They're all like, and then I'm like, give me 100 hertz. They all kind of go down a little bit, and then give me 10 kilohertz. And I'm like, this. So, that's an emotion. They're very basic emotions, but if you're telling me that 1K you do this phase, then yeah, and if I want some aggression, I may go for that. And it's three simple frequencies that you can actually now divide, multiply it by countless, possibilities. I think that's the very basic way to describe for someone that doesn't know what we do, right?
Right. Yeah. 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 It's just a really interesting way of looking at it. You know,
Yeah,
it's
we
different.
we apply it every single day without, with
Yeah,
not
without thinking about it. Yeah.
10,000.
All right. So it obviously worked out for you to do this because you were immediately sort of on fire. I mean, there's Whitney and Andre Crouch and Mary J. Blige, and like that's within a year and a half of you stopping working for Babyface and not recording anymore. So it really worked out.
It worked out. It worked out. You know, it's so funny because I never looked back. I never realized how, not until we have a conversation about it. But for me, it was just kind of like the tunnel vision, man. The blinders were always on. I was never looking at, never concerned about it, whether competition or what am I doing right, what am I doing wrong. I really took the approach of whatever's in front of me. I'm just gonna really, really try to make the best of it. And sometimes I succeeded, sometimes I didn't. And that was the very basic approach. I didn't know that. Oh my gosh, I'm working with Mary or I'm working with Biggie or looking back, it's amazing, and I almost wish I could be back in that moment to kind of you know digest that moment, and try to remember it and take a photographic memory of what that moment. But for me, it was, man, I was just had the blinders on, and I would just wanted to kind of keep going and try to do the best, the best possible work, and so that they could call you back, right? I mean, I always say we work for our peers, not the fans, because if it was for the fans, then it would, I think it would be a whole different approach. But I want to impress Jimmy Iovine, so he can call me back to do more projects, right? So we're working for our peers, and I always wanted to make sure that the people that were employing me were satisfied. Like I think we said it before. Like, not that getting your quote first hit is easy, because it's obviously not. But when the expectations are higher, the second, third, fourth, fifth time around, that's when it gets really tricky. That's when, because now the expectation is not this kid that just happened to do a good mix, or
Right, right. And you can never look back at the one that did really well and figure out why. And like, oh, great, I'll just do that again.
Like we said, you're only as good as your last hit, and it's you know, Rose from Record Plant would always say that, and she would always say, "You're only as good as your client."
Yeah.
And amen to that.
Yeah, absolutely right. You could be doing the best mixes in the world for someone who sells 4 records and only 4 people know about it.
And my advice was always, if I am doing that, I'm gonna try to take bigger chances, so that hopefully when I do get that big artist, I'm able to now apply some of the things and some of the fuck ups that I've done to other records that actually worked. It was like the testing. So I never saw, interesting enough, I never saw a record, someone like that wasn't gonna sell, or at the time, to me was always like, okay, it's like going to college, and this is your part of your, curriculum to be able to practice on some of these mixes. And I gotta say, early in my career, I practiced on a lot of Japanese records. I mean, like we were saying, no one heard them, and that de-essing was like the art of de-essing at the time. I learned how to de-ess from Japanese records, and stuff like that. So I think it's just being, just having a good attitude, right? I think that we always talk about the technical side, and how the emotional side as well, but also just as a human being.
Yeah.
If you're a human being, I don't know if a lot of people are gonna fuck with you.
Exactly. People have to want to hang, especially back then, because everybody was in the room. Now, you could be a total asshole and mix like crazy.
It's like that always comes out eventually, even if you're not in the room, because now email etiquette is like what used to be,
Yeah.
a student back in the day. Like, if you don't have good email etiquette, it's like, you better learn how.
Yeah. Yeah. Always find something positive to lead with.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we're so blessed to be in the studio, man. I mean, come on, this is like, there's there's even on the worst day, we're still doing okay. We're
Yeah.
doing what we love to do, and that to me is true success.
Well, all right. So you make this transition. You're now mixing all the time, and you're working. I'm assuming that a lot of the work was coming because it was with the same producers, right? Different artists, but same producers.
There was, like I said earlier, Soulshock and Carlin were very instrumental. Chucky Thompson, rest in peace, was great. Puff was great as well. Mario Winans. So I was starting to meet a lot of different types of producers. Warren Campbell, Dutch. I mean, they've just kind of got in with them, and Babyface as well. So it was kind of just being in the right place, the right time. And it was just like, it kind of just spread. Like, people at the time were looking for if you, I don't know, at the time there was a lot of mixers that were just older mixers. Maybe it was a transition when R&B started taking over the charts, and
Yeah.
listen, a 60-year-old mixer may not have the same sort of reaction that, say, the like KD and I were like the youngest guys at the time. I remember us always competing, and we're good friends, and but it was probably the healthiest competition with KD because we were in the same building and just down the hall from each other, and we were mixing a ton of like cool, like up and coming and established R&B, and I think again, I was at the right place at the right time where I feel like there was a transition of like, hey, let's see what some new cats can do.
Yeah, there were a couple people that managed to stick around, like Barney Perkins stuck around like nothing had ever happened. But
Yeah,
yeah, a lot of them did kind of go, and I think the same thing happened in the rock genre, like in all the genres. There was sort of a change over there as the technology caught up too. There were a lot of engineers who just couldn't get their heads around having to run Pro Tools or whatever.
that killed a lot of careers.
Yeah,
That
a
killed,
lot of great engineers. Yeah, when you couldn't afford to have a separate Pro Tools guy.
yep. And and I think that that teaches us being open-minded too. Like I remember back then, there were some engineers where they're like, "Oh man, this sounds like shit. I'm never gonna I'm never ever." Very grumpy old dudes, and I sound like that now. But it was they didn't embrace it, and man, it moved really quick. Within a year or two, half the engineers that were around, were non-existent. They
Yep.
couldn't trans. So I think that was a big thing too. If you were able to transition, and listen, it didn't sound. I mean, still has a different sound, but just like anything, there's an evolution. And we were talking about Atmos, how it's going to evolve eventually. You might as well embrace it and take a look at it and see what it could do. Maybe not right this second, but how you can grow with that technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, and there are some astounding records made on really early digital technology. I mean, if you think Trevor Horn wasn't making good sounding records, you're deaf.
Exactly. Exactly.
And
Yep.
that's late 80s, early 90s, you know.
And the way you're able to color too, I always say, like, when you're coloring, hey, what converters do you like? I'm like, fuck, my ears are gonna adapt and adjust to that
Yeah.
sound anyway. So I mean, I hate the sound of that, but give me whatever converter. Let me fuck with it because
Look, any knob you turn in that studio does more than the difference in the converters. And
exactly,
look, some are better, absolutely. And if I were capturing hi-fi stuff,
yeah,
I'd
yep,
care
yep,
a
yep.
lot more. But people have heard
Ours,
my mixes. They
like,
know it. They know I don't care.
you can have an amazing Honda, and you can have an amazing, AMG, whatever 500 SL, whatever Mercedes. I mean, yeah, you can see that one is maybe better than the other, but they're all do the same thing. They'll take you from B, So that's what, to me, that's what a good converter is. Great, I'll take the 500 SL. Don't get me wrong, but
Yeah, yeah.
if I had to, I can also drive the really cool Toyota Camry.
Yeah, if
It's-
you're going to lunch, you want lunch.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
so let's talk about this era a little bit because I mean, like in the year 2000, which is like 3 years after you split from Babyface, you
Mhm.
mixed tons of records. I should have counted them and written it down, but all it says in my notes is tons of records. And a lot of it is the stuff you're talking about, but there's also like there's the Pink record in there. Was that her first record?
That was
Or-
her first record. Yep, yep.
So
We
how'd
were.
that one come about?
I was going to Atlanta a lot, working with Noontime, and those guys were great. And then I had Brian Cox, Donnie Scant, and some of those producers. Brains, that was his name. That so, anyways, they were doing a lot of really cool up and coming producers that worked on Pink. And I know, I'm not sure. I think Soul and Cardin might have worked on that. I'm not really sure, but I was going to Atlanta a lot to do a lot of records there, mix a lot of records, and there was this artist named Pink, and she was, when she was starting, it was kind of like a very R&B urban heavy record. And if you listen to it, it's completely different from she. I love how she's evolved, but it was very very early in, and that was LaFace, LA was a big believer in, like Face, and some of these young up and coming producers, and again, I just happened to be in that mix, and I ended up, gosh, I don't remember how many songs I worked on that. I worked on a lot, but I think I mixed, gosh, I can't even tell you how many songs, but that was cool. It was a great experience going to Atlanta and getting to know all those guys from 112, again, Mario, Winans, and Brains, and all the guys I mentioned. I mean, I'm sure I'm forgetting a ton of them, but
And Dave Way was going there a lot too. Is that, did you guys hang out there or?
I never saw him out there, but I know he was going out there with, the same camp. He might have been going a little earlier, maybe a few years,
Right. Yeah. Well, because he is super old, you know.
He is super old. He's got to be what, 95,
Oh,
92?
at least, at least.
Right. No, but Dave Wade, man, shout outs to Dave. He's such a good guy. Such a
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. And I actually met him in Atlanta. I was doing a session down there, and he was so nice and so helpful. And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. There's so many good guys that, that we unfortunately don't get to see us often, but but they're great. They're great mentors and just people in general.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, there were some cool studios in Atlanta. So, was the did you work at the what's the place where Brendan O'Brien used to
No, no. I
the
know what you,
audio the audio oh gosh. Anyways, my
and
mind. There's a
something
few.
tracks.
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
Anyway.
the scene was pretty cool, very exciting, and we used to go to Miami too. Like, so, the Atlanta scene, of course, New York. I mean, that was like where the hub was at the time, and I was going there a ton. I was pretty much bi-coastal, it seemed like, for years, because all the labels were there, so they all kind of wanted to show up at the end of the mix and approve mixes and all that. So, for for years, I was kind of bi-coastal. I was, you know, going back and forth with Drew Hill, a lot of Drew Hill stuff, and again, Dutch was producing a lot of that with Kenneth Creer managing them, and yeah, we would go to New York and do a ton of things, and that was a great scene, man. Like back in Hit Factory days, with the lobby was probably the hottest lobby out of any studio I've ever been to, where you saw everyone. There's 3,000 platinum records on the wall, from floor to ceiling. It was, as a 20 at this point now, I'm like 23, 24 maybe. Man, it was just the most impressive studio. And then you have Mariah Carey in one room, you have Boyz II Men in another. I mean, these were the biggest artists at the time, and Puff, of course, and his whole crew. So it was a great time, great time. My definitely my golden age when I was like very impressed by all of that.
Right. And I was going to ask you if you started to have like specific rooms you wanted to mix in at that point. Were you kind of narrowing that down, or was it like, give me an SSL and whatever?
Yeah, back then it was like, we all had racks and we all moved everywhere. And at the time, I mean, listen, there were maybe 75 studios in LA. I remember when I sent my resume back when I was like 18, and there was at least 75 big studios. I think in LA there may be less than 10 now, right?
Yeah.
So there were, so people would look for better deals and look for a room, and so it was very common to kind of jump around, right? So I never really had a room, and then finally I was like, fuck, I need to really, I'm working enough that I can keep a room going, and I remember that feeling. I was at Skip Sailor's over on Larchmont, and then I remember Record Plan, because Record Plan was the hub. That to me maybe the West Coast hit factory.
Right.
So I wanted to be at Record Plant, so we used to book it a lot. And finally, I got my room there, and and then I was there maybe for a couple
And
years,
which room
and
were you in?
I was in SS. Well, let's see, SSL 2, which
So
was
the
the
one on the right, like halfway down the hall.
yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I would go between SSL 1 and SSL 3, which is the one in the back by the pool table,
Yeah.
and
Which, just to go on a tangent, that room always felt like it was facing the right way, and the other ones always felt like not right.
listen, Record Plant was an interesting place because you did never. I mean, honestly, you never went there for the sound of the rooms. You never went there for the quality of the equipment. Bros just knew how to run the studio, and you went and they would put the name of the artist on the on the door, and like you see Mariah Carey with the engineer, and you felt like you had a ride. Nowadays I would that would never work today.
Right.
Uh, Social media, but it was. I mean, I just wanted to be in that environment. And again, the equipment always kind of never worked, and the tech. I remember the tech being kind of a jerk, and it was just the scene, I think, more than anything. So
Yeah, well, I mean, and that place had been a scene since the 70s, even before it moved into that building. I mean, I
yeah,
remember a friend of mine was an engineer there back in the day, and when he was an assistant, his gig was to go out at 2 a.m. when the clubs were closing and bring girls back. I mean, a horrible, horrible thing to even say out loud now, but back then it was like you get that hot tub full for 2:30.
gosh, yeah.
Fucking hell.
Well, when I was there was a transvestite club across the street, so I
Yes.
happening to that
Yeah,
one.
yeah, big time, big time, and then it burned down overnight.
Zone, yeah, the zone. I was
The
so mean.
Zone.
All the new GAs over there and ask for the number 5 special with a milkshake and
Right. Yeah, it was
that's
really weird. Right across the street was that, which was a gigantic club, and then like the technical bookstore in LA.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It was weird, but it was a great place to be at,
Yeah,
and then that I moved to Track and Place, which was Babyface's. Babyface bought that building, the old Solar building on Cahuenga, and since Randy Cohen, my manager, was kind of started a publishing company with Tracy Edmonds, which was Kenny Babyface's wife at the time, called Yab Yum. He kind of did a split on the management as well. So I took over one of those rooms, which was great because that was the very first room that I could call my room.
right.
Great, great, great days, man. Great, amazing days. Uh, and then yeah, and then I was there for I'll tell you this how I ended up at Larrabee. So we had just finished an album. It was like 13, 14 songs, and we would always open up, go get some wine, right? At ear break, we would print it on the CD, go drive around in the car and make notes. We go to the store and we always would get a Chardonnay, chilled Chardonnay in a red. But since we had finished the album, we got this really nice this Bordeaux, really good bottle, right? And so we went back. We left the wine in the lounge, and then we brought the white wine because we're drinking as we're making some final changes to the song. But we opened the red one to let some air into it, right? We were airing it out. So we order some food, dinner. So we're gonna have the wine while we ate, and that was sort of the ritual when we finished albums, especially with Soul Shock. So we go in the lounge, and maybe 1/3 of the wine was gone, and we're like, how the fuck does that happen, right? So we see one of the GAs walking around with a solo cup, and him and his girl, and he's obviously impressing the girl because he's giving her a tour of the studio, right? And I'm like, hey man, is that our wine from the lounge? It's like, oh no. And of course it was, right? So the next day I had to go to New York, and I was my assistant at the time. He had never been to New York, so it was a big deal for him. So I always say, when you're first time in New York, you got to do the silly the double decker bus, right? You got to do it because it kind of gives you a feel for the whole city. So I'm on the freaking double decker bus with him, and I'll never forget. I called the studio manager. I'm like, hey, so and so kind of took the liberty and drank, a big chunk of our Bordeaux, and it wasn't cheap. But with wine, you just all you have to do is ask. We would have shared, with him. But the fact that he denied it is kind of bothering me. And I remember looking up, and we're right at the bottom of the Empire State Building, right? And then she said, "Well, I talked to him, and he did not he didn't do it." I go, "Look, I'm pretty sure there's no other lounge, there's no other wine. I mean, look, I don't want to get him in trouble, but at least, I just thought he'd want to know that this guy." And she completely denied everything and took his side. He's like, no, no, he would never do this. That's my guy, blah, blah, blah. And I was getting really frustrated looking at the building. I'm like, yeah, yeah, that's the Empire State Building. Oh, cool. At that moment, I hung up and called Larrabee. And Jamie was the studio manager. I'm like, Jamie, I'm about to leave the studio because, they're so unprofessional. And not that I wanted someone to buy me wine, but at least just apologize. Just
Yeah,
say,
yeah.
hey,
Just be honest. Yeah.
and she goes, I have a room for you. And that was the beginning of my residency here at Larrabee. And I never looked back, never went back. And
Wow.
yeah. And to me, now Larrabee at the time that's where like Record Plant was an artist friendly studio because they had a button for client service, and like you said, you can pretty much get anything. Larrabee was the complete opposite. It felt very sterile. It felt like you're going to the dentist in the hallways, but the equipment always worked. They had the best equipment outboard, and the rooms sounded so good. And all the great mixers that I looked up to had gone through Larrabee at some point. So that was sort of my dream to be at Larrabee. And that was the opportunity to leave. And Jamie's like, "Yep, we have a room," and I was gone. So
Right.
thank you, Runner, for drinking my wine.
Wow. And on a double-decker bus in Midtown. And I love it
Midtown.
because it sounds, it's only because I've been watching Curb Your Enthusiasm lately, but it's exactly like Larry David going all the way across the country. He's with somebody, you're sightseeing, but I'm just going to call about that wine. It's,
It's just bothering me.
and then look into their eyes. Oh, man. Well, and always Larrabee North. You always wanted to be in the building you're in now,
No,
or you would have been okay in.
yeah, I had done a ton of sessions at Larrabee West, like some of those early Drew Hill, Warren G, and
Right, and that's where Dave was as well, right?
exactly. And then Dave was also on Larrabee North, and the KD was here. The first time my studio here, Studio Two, at the time we're talking about being at different studios everywhere from New York, Miami, Atlanta, here in LA. And so I've been to a lot of rooms. So we were doing Usher, My Way with Tricky Stewart, and we were at Brandon's Way. So this is going back a few years, uh, and oh yeah, Tricky's like, oh let's go out tonight. Let's just go to a club or whatever. I'm like, yeah, cool, let's go. Get in the car. It's like, oh, we're gonna pick up a friend of mine. Do you know KD? I'm like, yeah, KD, of course. So we pull up at Larrabee and we walk down to Studio Two, and I will never forget this feeling when I walked into that room. Like it just took my breath away. It just took everything. It was love at first sight, and I never felt that about a room. And from that point on, I was obsessed with Studio Two at Larrabee. I mean, obsessed. Yeah, that was. I always said that's going to be my room. I'm going to fucking retire in that room. And I'll never forget that. And it's funny because Tricky and I always talk about that night. And a few years later, I end up back at Larrabee, but KD had that room, so I'm like, man, I need that room. I want to be in that room. So I had one, which was an amazing room too. But and then Kevin was building this room, Studio Three, and at the time there was surrounds. It was like people were doing surround mixes, 5-1 mixes.
Yeah.
KD wanted to take over Studio Three, and it was the new room. I'm like, listen, if anyone's getting the new room, it's me. But I knew that KD wanted Studio Three, so I kind of started like not necessarily manipulating it, but I was like, oh no, Studio Three is going to be my room, and it became this whole like, no. KD has seniority here, so therefore he gets the new room. I'm like,
Excellent.
okay, that's how I got Studio Two.
Wow.
But,
Yeah, painting this fence sure is fun, kids.
yeah. Right? I told Kale, I'm like, look, just redo the patio for me, and sure, fine, I'll move to Studio Two. Shit, okay. It worked out. It worked out. I
And
haven't
20 years later.
23 years later, maybe. Yeah.
Fucking hell, man. Well, look, we this is great, but we got to go back and talk about just a few of these records too, because
Yeah.
they're a few, and I know it's not the same. Like when you talk to the people who are recording, obviously it's a lot more the thing. But some of these records you're super involved with in really important records. So I'd love to just hear anything there's to say, like the Alicia Keys record.
Yeah.
The song's
Oh
in
my
A
God.
minor. I mean,
Oh my gosh.
come on.
Can I tell you the best story? Like what I
Yes.
Alicia and the very first time I met her, she must have been, gosh, 17 maybe. 17, 18. Gosh, she was so young. So I go to New York. I was working with Boys to Men, Jimmy Cozier, Olivia. Okay, so J Records, right? Clive gets his imprint on J Records, and Olivia and Alicia were the two of the first artists that they signed. So I went and mixed some Olivia stuff, and then this girl named Alicia Keys, right? So I'm working on this one song. I believe it was Jane Doe. Brian McKnight, I think, produced it. So, anyways, I'm mixing the song, and very early in the day, our auto tune is this H3000. I don't remember. We tune, detune, punch, detune,
Yeah.
punch. We had to go through the whole song and fix, and I just became really fast at it. It would take me maybe 10, 15 minutes to tune the whole song, right? And then when I heard it, I was like, oh, there's some pitchy notes. Let me just fix them real quick. Boom, 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 boom. And you would copy the track so you have safety of it and all that. So I had my quote tune vocal, and that was early in the day, maybe around noon when I first got in. Mixed the whole song. It was a beautiful, beautiful song. She comes in around 9, 10, with Carrie Crucial, the producer. I playing the song. This is the first time I met Alicia. And she listens to it and goes, "Wow, Manny, this is great. I love the mix. This is so good. I wouldn't change a thing," which is so rare, right? To like have someone just not have a single comment. And maybe she was just being nice because it was the first time we met. And but she was, but then she's like, let me listen to it again because there is one thing that I just don't know what it is. But play it one more time. Played it again. Like, again, the mix is great, but there's something with my vocal. There's so I'm like, oh, okay, maybe and I'm looking at the desk, right? And I'm like, oh, I got maybe some reverb, some maybe a slap delay, and maybe a slight harmonize. Let me take them off. No, no, put it back on. Okay, that's fine. I don't, gosh, I don't know. It was maybe a treatment, maybe it's an EQ, maybe it's this, and I'm trying to get it out of her, and she's like, no, it's like, so I'm like, oh, wait a minute, hang on. When I first came in, oh, let me patch around. I fixed a couple of tuning notes, but I have forgotten. Not that I was trying to,
Yeah, it's
not
just something you did on every mix, really.
mix. Yeah. So then I play her that, and she goes, "Boom! That's it. That's what I want." And this is where the one of those moments that I'll never forget. This 17-year-old kid telling me this. She goes, "Well, Manny, so check it out. So I didn't go to school. I'm not an expert at speaking English, and like I'm not an English major, and like so." What I want to do is I want my fans to connect with me for who I am. So if there is a pitchy note here and there, then that's to me saying that I'm not perfect, and that is why the record is special to me. Fucked me up to this
Wow.
day. I'm like, so the pursuit of perfection, what does that mean to a young mixer was fixing? We always joke we're fixers, not mixers. And to me, from that point on, it changed my entire mixing career on the pursuit of what perfection is. Here's like what I think was off, I'm fixing. But yeah, she's telling me that that is what the emotion is supposed to be about. And as a young mixer, man, it changed my life till this day. I take that approach on. There's no such thing as perfection. It's about emotion. And this 17-year-old kid is teaching me this.
Right.
And that was the first time I met her. And from that point on, we worked on, gosh, 5, 6 albums. Toured the world, not the world, but a lot of places with her. And I was, became kind of her dude at the time. So
Yeah, it's a pretty I mean, look, it's one thing to say like, "Oh, you tune my vocal, I don't want it tuned," but to that's a pretty deep reason to not tune it.
so deep. I mean, so deep. I couldn't. I remember it like it was yesterday. And recently we spoke about that night, and she's like, yeah, she could obviously wouldn't remember. There's so many stories that I have from her that I'd learned from her. But this was the most powerful one at the time where I thought I was in the pursuit of perfection. And then for me, at that moment, I started changing the style of mixing. To be more authentic than quote perfect. And yeah, it just changed my whole approach.
Wow.
Just one session.
I mean, I got goosebumps you telling me the story, so I can only imagine what it was like in the room. I mean, that it's huge.
Yeah, man. It's like, and there's so many of those moments too, like you said. But that was the Alicia, one of many aha moments that I
Man,
had.
well, you got any others from that kind of era? Because I mean, I could just start listing credits, but it's kind of like everybody anyone has ever heard of is in your list. And like we got a couple years to go before we get to someone else I definitely want to talk about. But um, I mean, there's a Santana record in there too.
It was Santana with Greg Alexander and Rick Knowles producing. Yep.
All right,
And Michelle Branch. Yep. Little bit of this, a little bit of that. Damn, I sang it. Oh shit.
nice.
Let me work auto tune my ass. So we that was a crazy record because it had been mixed already, and if you know Greg Alexander, Rick Knowles, those guys very very charismatic individuals.
Yes.
So man, that was the first time that I can remember Clive and The Office. I remember Rainey Hancock even emailing me like, "Oh my gosh, you like this, and that," and it was such a you know interesting mix because when we Greg was in London and he was very involved, but then the label didn't want him to be really involved, And then Rick was involved, but the label didn't want him involved, so I was kind of like in the middle of this, very very just oh man, just very interesting session. I remember being Clive saying, "Don't let him in the room. Don't do this." And look, I can only imagine that they made a mix and that Clive may not, not liked. So they kind of wanted to do your own thing. And I did, and I just went for it. And a couple comments here from Rick and Greg, but it was like the Santana moment that growing up as a Latino in LA. I mean, Santana was maybe one of the closest ones that you can kind of relate to because it wasn't Spanish, but it was English, and it was kind of
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
one
Julio
foot.
Iglesias and then him.
Yeah, there was not a lot. So for me to be even like pulling up his, the faders with him playing a solo was like, I mean. So, but it became, then became a huge hit after that. And Michelle, I mean, that's one of my favorite songs. And the one thing I remember people calling me saying, "Hey, man," and I remember this being maybe a transition from doing big, booty shaking music, like low end, bigger than anything else, to almost like a thin mix. And I remember that. Not having a lot of punch to it. I remember being almost, but I feel like that was the transition for me going from 808s and big kicks and big low end and anything else kind of was secondary. It's almost the opposite. It was the low end wasn't as important as the vibe and the groove and all that. And as a young mixer discovering things about yourself, like my natural self would have been like adding a ton of low end because that's what I'm used to. That's how I've been mixing records. But having the man, just the I don't know what the word is, but having being humble enough to trying something that you're not used to, and being in a very vulnerable like. Well, what I would do because I just mix Mary or whatever, whoever the art, I would do this to this, and they're calling me because they probably want this, and that. That would have been the most obvious thing to do, but I remember very clearly not doing that. Like, don't no no, don't reach for that kick. Oh no no, don't leave the bass alone. Don't put some 80 hertz or 40 hertz on
And
it. No,
how come? Like, what made you decide to do that? Was that a conversation you'd had, or
not a conversation at all. Actually, it was just about the level that Clive wanted it, the impact, the emotion, the the horns. It was more about something completely different than what I was used to. And I honestly, it was just very, maybe just natural, to for the song to be this way, as opposed to me giving it a sound. And I think that was early, because I never just wanted to do one genre. I wanted to like cross genres just because I love music, and I never wanted to be the hip hop guy or the rock guy or this guy, or we all get pigeonholed unfairly because I feel like we can do more than just one genre, all of us. So at the time, if you remember, it was like you wouldn't cross genres as easily,
Yeah.
and I always wanted to do that. I always very conscious to be able to do that, but subconsciously it was coming out almost not natural, but naturally. But it was forgetting what I learned from hip hop and R&B, and maybe applying it to now what pop was beginning to be pop, and and sell records. So it was a different approach. It was a very, very different approach. And even to this day, I listen to that mix, and it has nothing to do with low end, but the impact of the song itself. So I think to learn about what makes you feel a certain way, how you tap your foot, your shoulder, and all that, I feel like that's more powerful than the actual sonics. And that's why, going from the Alicia story to this to, I mean, there's another 100 of those stories that kind of made me think a different way than I think a lot of us were thinking at the time. I always joke like, man, I want to mix from Buster Rhymes to Leon Rhymes. So I wanted to mix it all. I didn't want to again be pigeonholed to just doing one thing. And I remember going to my manager thinking, look, I want to do this record. It's like, well, they don't have the budget for you. You're gonna lose money by working on that. I'm like, I don't care, but I want to do that. And there was a project, Citizen Cope, the Clarence Greenwood recordings, where I mean, we didn't lose money, but it was one of those where the budget wasn't as big as some of the other budgets that I was working on. And of course, my manager, the protector that he should be, was like, "Nah, man, we got so many other projects that will pay X amount." But I found a connection, and he was kind of like an alternative. I always say he was Post Malone before Post Malone. Very, very and we started doing records like that. Like, there was a song called Pablo Picasso, and I mean that just kind of changed my life and changed the way I mix records as well. And uh and it was kind of getting away from like that stereotype that Manny only does R&B. If you want an R&B mix, there's these three guys, go to one of the three, right? And I feel like that's the first time when someone called me and it's like, oh, that's some live guitar stuff and live drums, and people were not used to that. And I'm thinking, well, shit, I started as a live drum, as a drummer, so
Yeah.
that was kind of like my natural. And I started going back to last couple of weeks ago where I learned from Jimbo, just based on basic mic techniques on EQ. That's how I learned how to EQ. So for me, doing this live, sound was very, very organic and natural for me to work on. And at the time, I almost preferred it. So then I started mixing a ton of things that had live instrumentation, which I felt very comfortable doing. So I know it sounds weird, but it's at the time, it was very hard to kind of cross those. People like,
Yeah.
oh, you don't do with live drums, or vice versa. Now it's a genreless world, so it's very common, more common, but not back in whatever 98, 99, when I
No, no, not at all. Not at all. Yeah, it's pretty impressive. You to be able to stop yourself. Like you didn't give them the first mix and they said, "Oh, hold on a second. We don't really want that thing." You're like, "Oh, right, okay, you get it." But to get it while you're mixing is pretty impressive.
being conscious of of what that is in front of you, and also what to me is like being a fan of music too. Like I grew up in neighborhoods where my the kids I was hanging out with, we all listen to hip hop. That's all we listened to. But then at Hamilton, we play jazz and everything with live instrumentation, jam bands. We have like fucking rock guitars. So I grew up with this very rock playing aggressive, sometimes even not metal, but very distorted guitars. But then I would go to the kids in my neighborhood and we'd listen to only hip hop. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but it was I'm I was happy to be a part of maybe understanding both. I don't want to say cultures, but genres.
Well, yeah, I
So
mean, because I think very early on you got the fact that there can be angry rock and angry hip hop, and they make you feel the same way.
yeah,
It's not different. A good punk track and an aggressive hip hop track, it's the same thing in terms of what you feel while you're listening to it. And that's, again, there's a lot to that. And to be able to unpack that just on the fly is pretty badass.
yeah, but it's just becoming a fan too. Like that, I've learned more about being a fan. I remember right around the same Alicia time where Marilyn Manson was coming out with his demonic sort of like facade, right? And I remember having the TV on, and MTV was playing like all like Marilyn Manson's videos, and people were getting freaked out by him because he was a devil worshiper and all that. And I remember clients would say, turn it off," right? And then a couple years later, Beautiful People comes out, and you're like, what the fuck? That's like the greatest sound I've heard. And I listened to that record so many times and analyzed why and how, and just it sounded so amazing, right? Um, so I started to now realize that if you hate something, right, that's a very strong emotion. It's
Yeah.
as important as loving something, right? So I always say that if you find yourself hating something, you should take a deep breath and analyze why you hate it, because it obviously triggered an emotion that you should be aware of. And you can utilize that while you being creative. Like if you hate something, that means someone got to you. you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. Being
Love
indifferent
someone.
is bad, but hating
Yeah.
it is not. Yeah.
So I always say, anytime you think you're hating something, take a deep breath and try to analyze why you hate it.
Right. Right. And then again, why you like it. Because when Beautiful People came out, it retained all of the theatrics and all of that, but it's the Nine Inch Nails production, but it's glam,
Yep. Exactly.
you know?
And you learn so much from those moments. And I believe that we continue like learn from those moments, even in music today. It
Yeah.
doesn't years ago. It's something that we are. I continue to learn every day.
Well, look, man, I'm aware of the time here, so we're going to skip over the fact that you did actually mix a Leanne Rimes record right about the same time,
Yeah.
because just after that is the first time you worked with Kanye. So let's talk about Kanye, because that's been a very, very long relationship with a
That's been.
guy who doesn't seem like someone people would have long relationships with. So,
Yeah.
and you're there pretty much from the beginning.
I was there from day one. Yeah. So I met him through Mike Karen. He was producing not Slum Village. I'm gonna. Anyways, there was a group out of Mississippi, a bunch of guys, and anyways, we were. He was producing. He comes into the studio right after the Blueprint, and he was really quiet but super talented, up and coming producer. There were many of those at the time, right? But he just had something. So we hit it off. Then he called me again and again on stuff that he was producing. And then one day he goes, "Look, I'm working on my own album." I'm like, "All right, here we go." And he starts like rapping, like a cappella. And I'm thinking, "Oh shit, this guy's a storyteller. I mean, he's like a slick Rick of today." He's very visual. I can visualize what he's saying. And I gotta tell you, man. From that point on, I remember being like almost like a protector, like my little brother, because people, at the time, again, he was not wearing clothes that other people were wearing, like but the oversized jerseys and this. He was wearing, slightly, definitely different. He was quote a backpack producer, definitely different than what was going at the time on the beats he was trying to sell. So there were many times where people would walk in and be so disrespectful to him, like, "Man, shut the hell up, just play me some beats." No, you gotta hear this. And he was like a little kid, like that kid that you know gets sent to the bedroom, his bedroom, like just because people didn't want to listen to him as a rapper, but there was something really special about him. Uh, and from that point on, we the whole most of the first album, College Dropout, we actually worked on it at Larrabee under other people's budget because he didn't have a budget. So we would literally work on his album, and then at 6, 7, I would throw faders up because that the client was coming, and it was like the quickest fucking mix ever. And I literally would do a 2 hour mix with him just watching me. I'm like, "Ah, go, go, go! They're gonna be here. They're gonna be here." Boom! They would walk in and we play the mix, and they're like, "Yeah." And he was a great seller too. Like even if the mix wasn't there, he's like, "Yeah, check this out," and boom, and they would leave an hour later, and then we go back to his album. So we did that album like most of it on other people's budget. Then and I'll never forget this. I was in Atlanta and I was talking to G, and he man, I was so excited about the A's album, and he calls and said that the label was going to drop him, and I was like, oh, what a bummer, because he didn't really fit again what Rockefeller was doing at the time. So I was so disappointed, right? I was like, oh man, I really really like what we were doing with him and his stuff and his music and him and all. And then he got into an accident like a week later when I came back to LA. He left the studio, and he almost lost his life. As a matter of fact, I just read something that happened 20 years ago, a couple of days ago, or something
Wow.
crazy. So he almost died, and a week later, we're in my studio here. Unlike they say that he tracked it at record plant, but he was tracking it everywhere. But we finished most of it in Studio Two, where he rapped through a wire. His mouth was wired shut, and he literally did the whole fucking verse. Yeah, he he. I'll never forget when he ordered lunch. There's not a lot you can eat. He ordered some chili, and we put it through a blender, and he was eating it through a straw. Which was so wild. I don't know why I remember that, but that's he released through the wire, and that was it, man. I've never seen any trajectory from any artist quite like that. It just kind of went from here, and it hasn't, stopped. And then from that point on, we developed this pretty cool relationship. From I would drop him off every night because obviously he wasn't driving, and we talk about you know just being cocky or being confident, and you could tell already at a very young age he was kind of building this alter ego in his head on what he building that character. So he was a extremely extremely smart, and yeah, it became one of those great relationships over the years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've worked on pretty much everything he's done, right?
Most of it, yeah, yeah, most of it. Sometimes there's stuff that I didn't for whatever reason, but I think I would say most of it.
So, I mean, and this is only because I'm slightly ignorant. So, the persona that he built, I mean, and obviously that persona is very, very well known,
Yeah.
but has it sort of taken over, or is he still the same dude when you get in a room with him and you're just working?
I think no matter who you are, it's got to change you. It's got to change. Your perception of life. I mean, we always see what some of these big personalities. It's impossible to stay the same, right? So I think he has changed. I mean, to me, listen, I never mix politics and music ever, ever. But I think for the first time I did because you know uh, in certain administration that were putting kids in cages trying to cross the border. Hey, I just told you about my story. That could have been me. So
Yeah.
can't support that ideology. And anyone that supports that, I have a problem with it because there's ways you can handle it without being a very more humane way of doing it. Than is there a problem? Absolutely, but someone that supports that, I just don't necessarily. I don't want to fuck with, and I never crossed that. I never drawn that line because I don't think it should until it hits home. So when he did come out and start supporting someone like Trump, whether it's all theatrics, whether you support him because you're trying to, he's a marketing genius. That's what he is. or you do support that ideology. So either way, either one is not cool with me. So I think that since then, I don't know if I would be the right person to work on his music, because I don't think
Right.
I wouldn't put my heart and soul into it for those reasons. So, and again, this is the first time I've ever done that, you know. So I think that over the years, whether you become that person or not, you know, then at
Yeah,
some
yeah.
point,
It's part of you.
yeah. And for me, it's like, look, at some point, you gotta stand up for what you believe in.
Yeah, look, and until recently, the choices weren't that extreme in the
Yeah,
mainstream. The
exactly,
extreme was on the outsides, but now all you got is that. So you're confronted with it more.
exactly. So I think that could be one, you know, a main reason why I wouldn't be the right guy for the job. Put it that
Right.
way.
All right. Look, we're gonna. It's got 20 to 9 already. Let me ask you about a couple more things because there's a record you did in 2004 for Khaled, the Algerian guy. And everyone's gonna think it's DJ, right? But he's
Wow.
like he's like the fucking superstar of the Rai music in Algeria.
Yeah, man.
So how did that one come up like in the middle of you just being on fire? I mean, you're a supernova at this point, basically.
Man, I can't believe you brought him up. Shit, that was incredible. You know, I think I forget the label, but it must have been something that I had done that someone heard, or maybe the label heard and thought it was a good idea for me to, you know, mix it. Or, but I remember at the time he was like, "Fuck, man!" It was one of my favorite things that I worked on, and again, maybe because it was so different from what I was working on at the time. And there's a lot of projects that I think back and feel like they kind of change your perception of what you like, you know, because you feel like, oh, this is what I love mixing right now, and I can mix, you know, 100 more records like this. But you know, there's another one, Kanan, that's also he's Somalian, and I remember a lot of African artists throughout, you know, my career that, you know, that I've worked on, and it's just, you know, it's just refreshing for me. It was so refreshing to work on something that I maybe haven't heard quite like it, you know, and I didn't know he. Thankfully, I didn't know he was such a big star, you know, like that. It just kind of it was fun. You know, it's so funny that you bring him up.
Yeah, but I think it's really interesting because it goes back to the Santana thing in a way. Like you're never trying to impose your will. You're never like, "Hey man, this is the thing I do." You're always doing what you feel is right for the music.
Yeah, yeah. I always say it. You know, some people want sounds, right? And I always, you know, very mindful of not having a sound. You know, because it's not about me. It's not about us. We're just lucky enough to give our opinions on something. I mean, that to me is so. It's such an honor to for someone to ask for my opinion and actually care. You know, and how we give them our opinion is based on what we send back, right? Sometimes they like it, sometimes they don't. Sometimes we work on it together, but it's really just asking for your professional opinion. So
Yeah.
I'm always honored that people would ask for an opinion, that they care what I have to say. And what they do is not about me. It's not about what I can give them. It's how I can contribute to what their vision ultimately is. And I feel like that mentality has gotten me out of trouble many times. You know.
Right, but you manage to catch yourself before you ever get in trouble. Whereas I think a lot of people might sort of go down the road and then recover and like, oh right, yeah, yeah, okay, from these comments I got to do something different and then sort of rediscover it. But that you do that on the fly by yourself is pretty
Yeah.
impressive.
You know, it's crazy because I think people tend to overcomplicate things. You know, and I think that this business is all about. I mean, look, you have to think you're the best. You just have to. You got to think that you're the best producer, engineer, mixer, artist in the world. You have to, but you don't have to verbalize it, right? But you also got to be humble enough to be able to learn from other people that you look up to, from maybe even some younger producer, artist, engineer, mixer, and that's a very tough. Um, it could get the vision could become very blurry because you don't know what to hang on to,
Yeah.
because you still got to have that confidence, right? And not the cockiness, but the confidence. But you still got to be humble enough to learn. Like we just went and talked about the Pro Tools shift, right? Where people were too not humble enough. Actually, they were just, hey, this is the way I make records. I made a gazillion dollars making records like this. Go fuck yourself. I'm not gonna change it.
Right.
Well, that's not being humble about something. So therefore, you're. I mean, nobody knows who you are now because you weren't humble enough to embrace that. So I think that's the combination of both is really tricky, and some and I think we all have to be aware of that to hopefully do a, do a good job.
Well, and I think like it would have been really easy for you to come out of that Alicia Keys session saying like, well, I guess she just doesn't want her vocal tune, but whatever. And like not have gotten this absolute landmine blown up in your face about what you had to think about.
Yeah, yeah. And again, it's just going back to being a student of the game, right? I mean, we all got to stay humble and learn. I mean, Babyface gave me the best explanation of what the ego is like. We were so crazy. We were doing the Stones. That was like my first week being his engineer. We were doing the Stones, and he had just come off the Change the World, Eric Clapton, remember Grammys and all that.
Yeah.
So Stones were like, "Oh, we want the Babyface sound." So I just so happened to be there, and Ed, obviously he's recording it. I'm just a fly in the wall, and they have all the Stones are there and Babyface playing the Rhodes. It was incredible, incredible. I wish I had a freaking a camera, or I wish I had evidence of that. So we got in the car after this one session with the Stones. We were at Ocean Way, going back to Brandon's Way. So we the way he described it, and I always say this now, it's like imagine having a sheet right in front of you, but the thread count is it's you can see through it. You can kind of see shapes, but you can't really see through it. I guess you can't you can't see the define. Like say if someone's standing in front of you, you can't see their eyes or mouth, but you see the shape, right? So he described that as being the ego, where you can actually kind of see, but not clearly, right? He goes, the moment you remove that sheet, now you can see clearly. And he goes, and that's your ego. And when you have that sheet, there's going to be people that are going to go right past you because you're just focused on this image. When the sheet is removed, you can see everything around you, and you can see who's coming up behind you, who's in front of you, and now you're aware of everything around you. And that's, to me, that was like the best explanation of what the ego really is. And
Wow.
you remove that sheet, then then you can see clearly, and you can make better choices, better decisions.
It's amazing. And coming from someone who, of all the people in the music business who could get away with having an ego, those guys could have, and they didn't. Yeah.
Exactly. Someone like Babyface.
That's amazing, man. Look, we're going to have to get to the Q&A already. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to mention the fact that in 2005, in terms of when they came out, you mixed 55 albums.
Really?
Yeah. I counted those. Should we just... I don't even know what to fucking say about that. I didn't even write down any artists' names. It's just like it was too many. It was 55. But what we're going to do, we're going to do a little Q&A, get you out of here. Next is going to be part 3 of 4. We're not going to finish this in one more. But we're going to start off with John Mayer because I think that's a big thing as well, right?
Yep, that was a big.
Yeah. All right. So that's where we're going to start next time. But let's get Mark in here, get you some questions because technically you only got like 10 minutes, but we'll go until you say no more.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. It's amazing. I actually am rested after these. It's not like tell Brower, man, we could have done that in 5 parts.
The fact that anybody is listening is amazing.
Man, they are, and it's amazing. It really, really is. And it's always like this where there's stuff that just, I mean, I get my mind blown every single time I interview anybody, and you've had some stuff that's just like, what the fuck? It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. So even if no one's watching, just for me, this is well worth it. But believe me, there are thousands of people watching, which is great because there should be.
Going back to those moments too, it's like, because I haven't really, I still kind of had the blinders on. We never really get to talk about stuff like this. So it's really unique for me to go back to those moments and trying to relive and what my perception of it was. And I'm sure if that person was sitting here, their perception could be completely different, right? Completely different.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, your perception is your reality though. And if something's a big deal, it's a big deal.
Yeah. Hey, there was a study that just came out that scientists believe that they're 50% sure that this could all be a simulation.
Yeah.
Think about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Well, because what would be the
I could be
difference?
making
That's the
you up
thing.
right now. I'm making you up in my head right now, giving me some
That's cool,
compliment.
man. Could you give me some more hair on top, though? Fuck. Help me
I will
out.
try to do that. Yeah, I don't know. That could be tough. You're already there, so maybe the
Dude.
next life.
Oh,
You know.
come on.
So no, this is great. So yeah, I'm here for anybody that wants to
Awesome.
ask.
Well, yeah, I'll email and we'll set up part 3 for as soon as you can do it. So
Yeah, next
excellent. All
couple.
right, Mark, what do you got?
Awesome. All right. A lot of questions.
Mark, your writing is so amazing. Fuck.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks.
good. You exfoliate?
What? Exfoliate. Do I exfoliate? I don't. I don't. Should I look into this?
No,
I know what I'm going to YouTube for. Okay. So for anybody watching on YouTube or Facebook, we are taking questions over in Crowdcast. The link is in the description if you want to go over there and submit a question. We start with the most upvoted question on Crowdcast. And our most upvoted question today is from OH3, who has a burning question. Should probably get it checked out. Where do you leave the overall mix level before you actually send it to master? And how much headroom should I be leaving for the master?
So I feel like nowadays we're kind of pre-mastering our mixes anyway. I mean, I think that for me that could be episode 20 because we can spend 3 hours talking about gain structure and all that. But for me is, look, there's two ways. I try to be as hot as possible. Whatever loves that is. I'm very aware of my loves. But if I feel like I'm on the brink of destruction, I send two versions to the client. Actually, I say this is like my hyped pre-master version, and this is the unhyped one, which I think obviously I would prefer the unhyped 9 out of 10 times, but at least it gives the client the ability to choose. So I do, I smack the desk. My meters on the desk don't move. So I like the sound of that saturation off the desk. And then if it becomes, if it's my, minus whatever 10, 8 loves, which is, I mean, I've seen some -6 that are crazy. But, I try
Welcome
to.
to my world.
Yeah. Well, we get them too. I try not to, I try to my approach is to be as loud as possible without breaking it up, and how we add dynamics to that. So if you're like your loudest section in the mix, maybe I'll start with that and then kind of work my way backwards. So we can add dynamics to that loudest section. So you don't get this you're not agitated by the time you're done with the mix or the song. What we do is how can we make you hit repeat on that song? That's our job. Like, how can we make what can we do for you to hit repeat, right? And again, there's maybe 100 different ways to achieve that. One is, I always say when we choke the mix, right? I mean, there's a reason why people want to go to the next song. They may not even know what that is. So our job in today's world is how do we navigate through the loudness and still give it some life?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there is a misconception that a certain number, now you can't have any life in the mix, and that's not true, man. There are mixes that are so loud and have so much impact and excitement, and the numbers are weird. And I also want to ask you, because you're sitting in your Atmos room. I mean, with Atmos, you've got to be at -18.
Got to be. Yeah.
And it's kind of crazy.
It's really, really interesting.
Because you're AB, and with mixes, you've just turned down 11 dB.
Exactly. I got to turn down my stereo mix about that much, about 11 dB, 10, 11, and kind of AB it and be like, oh shit. I mean, so you learn so much about energy on how you smack certain things and how when you unglue it, now you're like, man, it's like such a different way of thinking and world. And it's kind of, it's exciting, but it's like relearning how to mix.
Yeah. And LUFS too. I mean, look, you want to get away with a louder mix, just do a fucking breakdown in the middle. Right. It'll go down. Like your choruses can still be at like -2. Yeah. And it'll say it's at -30.
Right, exactly. it's a combination of technology and and how we perceive that, like you said, sections, right? And how frequencies, we just talked about 1K being, like 10K being like happy. And how can we manipulate some of those frequencies based on the sound, the source, and how can we mind fuck the listener into thinking that they are taking a maybe a mental break, whether it's those 2 seconds or 8 bars or whatever that is. And I think that's a it's definitely an art form today that wasn't there, 20 years ago.
And when you're talking about having a hyped and an unhyped, is it as simple as a limiter, or are you dropping level going into the mix bus, or where
Yeah,
is your difference?
going into the processing, this, all the, some of the, as you know, if someone has an ozone 9 on their rough mix, we have to get that.
You have to
Like,
compete.
we have to at least, it would be the equivalent to playing a guitar through a wah-wah and having the direct signal, and me getting the direct signal without the wah-wah. I would be like, well, shit, just print the wah-wah, because that's like part of the sound. That's part of your production. And we talked about this last time, where
Yeah.
you don't send your ozone 9 just because it's IP to your whoever did the rough. I got news for you. You're gonna look like an idiot, because the artist is gonna be like, no, just send it. Jesus Christ, it's just a plug-in. So
Yeah.
so we have to start like that. We have to start with that ozone 9, and now we can start building from that and taking, shaving it and coloring it from there. But we gotta have that. So for me, it's like, if I have a signal going in, I tend to lower that, and that would be my unhyped mix, which now gives you a little bit more headroom.
Right. Right.
And
Awesome.
but the glue is not there. The glue changes.
No, I think, it's gotten, and for good reason in a lot of cases, especially my mixes, like level has gotten a bad name. Like, you have to have dynamic range and not be too loud, but it's why some of this stuff is exciting. My example is always put on a Skrillex record, and that's as close to a square wave as you're ever going to get, and it's so exciting. It's insane.
Yep.
Mhm.
So a lot of the producers are just are gonna have to adapt, like the new generation, how they adapt to this new world that we live in.
Yeah.
Loves and but it's always been like that.
All right, Mark, what do you got?
Awesome. All right. Next one is from Jan, and their question is, what's your philosophy on referencing your mix against other mixes? What do you listen for, and do you do it at all?
I don't do it at all. Oh man, I haven't. Sometimes a client will say, "Hey, listen to this song," and sometimes I don't listen to it just because my perception of that song is probably better than what I think the actual song is. You know, so I try to. Yeah, I just haven't done that. I know maybe other mixers will listen to whatever. I don't know. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't. I just don't reference other mixers or other mixes that I've done in the past too. I just kind of go for maybe more of the raw energy that's in front of me. Because again, the mind manipulation that happens in every mix is just, I mean, I think we can all relate to that. And how you look, sometimes you may have a bad day in your personal life, and that can kind of, it spills over to your mix that day, and you could have a really good day, but the song is sad, and you can all of a sudden the ballad sounds like a happy ballad, so it's like being aware of what that emotion that the song should have and what your mental state is really, really important. And I think that people that do it over and over and over again, some people do it on a conscious level, and others do it maybe subconsciously, where you kind of, it's a muscle that we've trained to kind of separate ourselves. I always say when that door closes, I mean, this is a tonic temple. I should be, whatever happened outside of this room, my mind, I have to hit that switch and reset it in a way, so that you can give that song the best possible chance. So for me, it's like I try not to listen to other things because they will influence me a certain way. And I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just saying for me personally, I just want to grab that
Yeah.
emotion, that the raw emotion, and see what happens with that.
I think we're very similar in that way. Like, I just get confused, but there are some people who've got playlists. Like, I know JJP and Greg Wells both have playlists that they'll listen to while they're working. But for me, like what's confusing about it is, let's say you've got a mix that you say, well, okay, this is the one where I love the low end on this mix. But if the difference in level between the bass and the vocal is different than on your mix, like how do you even compare it? Like what are you listening to? Which level do you put the same? And
Yeah, it
it's
just becomes
impossible.
yeah, it just becomes really confusing. And again, you have to be really careful with that because now a confused mixer is like the worst mixer ever. You know,
Who's
like
got two thumbs and is confused? This guy.
this guy right here. I highly doubt that.
Oh,
Awesome.
it's true.
Okay, here's a really good question from Rez. Do you and Andrew pay any attention to the triad of health in relation to studio work? So eating, exercise, and sleep. Do you have any systems to split your sessions to make sure you eat regularly, stretch, etc.?
Yeah, man, you have to. I think this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So getting your mind right. Even if you just sit, I try to sit alone for 10 minutes throughout the day. Maybe sometimes I do 20 minutes, but just sitting alone, just turning, just not listening to music and just, meditating, I guess. For me, meditation is not a mantra, but maybe just listening to your own thoughts, And to me, that's more powerful because your mind, you'll see what state of mind you're in because sometimes your mind will just go fucking a million miles an hour. You close your eyes, you're almost like dizzy just from your mind going so fast. And that I know myself that I know my mind's very stimulated today. So maybe I'll slow it down and then I'll just let my thoughts just kind of take me on a journey in a way. It could be about food, could be about mixes, could be about my car, the weather, whatever it is. Just for me, I let my mind kind of take me on that journey, and then 10 minutes, 20 minutes later, I open my eyes and I reapproach what I was approaching in a slightly different way. I try to do boxing a few times a week, and that just to fucking hit something really hard. And my trainer,
That isn't an assistant.
it's legal. I won't
Yeah,
go
that's legal.
So I think I used to take just walks and listen to just motivational things. I always think you should spend 20, maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes a day learning something new, and I try to do that. I started a restaurant and I've been really, really involved in that. So for me, my meditation is kind of listening to podcasts from other restaurateurs on their journey. And to me, that's learning something new so that, that you can just become a better mixer, because I think that being away from the studio makes everyone better and appreciate it more. And I know we'll talk about verse next time, but to me, that's given me so much more life as a mixer because now I, you go back to the thing you love the most, and you see a whole different, a whole different career, not career, a whole different sector and food and beverage that is challenging, and you come back here and you're like, man, whoa, I'm so thankful to be in the studio right now and not doing some dishes or food and it's given me this new sort of life and appreciation even almost 30 years later, like almost like a little kid, the same feeling I had when I was 19. So yeah, so your mind has to be right, your body has to be right, and if it's not, then you're gonna crash. I mean, you're just gonna crash.
Yeah, I'm the same. If it wasn't for my wife, I would not eat properly. That's for damn sure. But like 5 or 6 years ago, we started doing yoga, and that's been really helpful, both physically because I've had a bad back forever, and that's helped a lot. But also mentally, just to say, even if it weren't yoga, but to say like, I know I've got a ton of work to do, but it's Monday, it's 10 a.m. I got an hour and a half class, and I got to do it. And that's been really, really good. And I think having other interests is important too, because first of all, it's taking a break. But second of all, anybody who's good at anything has something to teach you about the thing that you're doing. It doesn't matter what those two things are. They could seem completely unrelated, but everything is related. It's all about how you approach things, how you get to the end of something, how you make people happy, what people think about your work, what you think about your work. It's always the same.
Amen.
Awesome. so fun listening to you guys talk about this because I'm drawing so many parallels to musician talks that I've heard or interviews where they're really kind of talking about the same thing in the context of going and performance, going and performing. But uh, that's exactly, what happens when you sit down to the console as well. So very cool. Okay, this one is from Sebastian, and he says, "Hi, Manny. Thanks so much for sharing your experiences with us. I want to ask you about your amazing low end and vocals work. Can you share with us what are your approaches to these two topics?"
So it's funny because I mixed going back to Kanye an album 808s and Heartbreak, right? And everyone's like, "What'd you do to the 808s on that album?" I'm like, absolutely nothing.
Put up the
There's-
fader.
you don't need to do anything to an 808. So I don't know if it's a trick or how you color, right? Like the art of EQing, right? To me, it's like coloring, like separation. We talked about it briefly, where you go to a Picasso, and there's the Cubist movement. It was very defined. Lines were very, very defined. It could be one color on this side of the line and a completely different color on the other side of that line. And then you go to someone like a Renoir, right, where everything seems to kind of blend in. There's no separation, clear separation. I see that as EQing because sometimes you want a separation between instruments, and you got to have a very clear separation. Other times you want glue, right? You want this thing to just kind of blend all together. Understanding both approaches and techniques. I promise you guys, I'm gonna turn my do not disturb thing.
Well, I think you probably just got the same email I did from Mix with the Masters, so
Oh,
it's all
oh,
it's
really?
all good.
So my thing is learn how to EQ and learn how to do both techniques on separation and glue, and I think that to me is what that's how we create emotions, right? That's how we create glue and dance to an alternative record, or the complete opposite from a hip hop record where it's all the Picasso, where you have separate lines for different colors. So some people see EQs, music in colors, right? Like I tend to, whether I learned maybe the SSL colors. I don't know what it is, but I try to associate every frequency to or piece of gear to a color. So if it doesn't matter what color it is, it's all subjective, right? So you can be like, my GML 8200 is gonna be the top end is whatever that is. Could be a shape, could be anything, and I know that if I'm lacking something like that, I have my arsenal is there where I know I can go to that sort of shape. It could be or color, and now you're coloring with those frequencies with different EQs from different manufacturers, and learning those colors is so important. And it could be the same as with plugins, right? I mean, plugins, give you a different sort of characteristic to that. I don't know if I answered his question, but
No, I think
No.
definitely because it's impossible to say
Yeah.
like, oh, here's what I do with low end. But there was an interview I watched, and I can't remember who it was with, and I think we touched on it last time too. But this idea of the glue or the separation, but it just like in the like take the kick snare relationship. Are they going to be like that? Are they going to be like that? Are they going to be like that?
yep, exactly.
And that tells you so much. It's like, well, do you want the low end of the snare
Mhm.
up with the mids of the kick, or do you want to shave that off and let the kick own it? And if you think about it, if you look from this angle, you're masking. So, and that could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing. There's no right or wrong with it, but it's a great way to think about it.
But so going to like, what do you do with the vocals and what do you do with the low end? So going to that technique is I like to have my vocal as pure as possible. Like, so that means that I start coloring around that. So going back to the 808, like I don't do anything to the 808s. I honestly don't do anything, but I do color around the 808 so that the 808 kind of exists in its own sort of spectrum, I guess. And that's what I do with vocals as well. Now, are there techniques, de-essing and reverbs and delay? Yes, of course. There's a million different techniques, but the fundamental way for me to look at a new mix is like, what's the purest form of that sound, and let me try to keep it as pure as possible, because then I don't have to work that hard.
It's a really important concept, actually. I mean, because yes, the 808s already sounded great, but you could easily have fucked that up by letting other things interfere with them. So the mixing isn't for the thing that sounds great; it's for all the other stuff that could get in the way. In that instance, and that's a big concept.
Yeah, and I always say, like, listen to what you're EQing things. Listen to what's around it, like touching it, and your point of like this. Yeah, yeah. So how it's
It was more of like a gang sign, probably, but yeah, it's the worst
but
gang ever.
but that's no, but that's exactly what we're talking about. Separation of what that is, and when you're, for example, if I have a vocal here, and I bring maybe a synth, and that immediately does this, and it's fighting it, then I know that I have a choice. What's my focal point? And at this point is my vocal. So therefore I'm going to color around that vocal with the synth. And so when I'm EQing that, I'm listening to the vocal, not the actual thing that I'm EQing. So that's another way, kind of look at it, and help you shape, and that, I think, give me an EQ, and I think that to me is the most powerful thing we have in our world, because you can separate, you can glue, you can do so many things with EQ. You would think that compression glues things together, and yes, 100% yes, but you can glue things with frequencies and without even using a compressor yet. And once you have that, then you have a good foundation to your home that you're building. So, but if you don't have that, then at some point, at any point, it could be completely destroyed because you don't have a good foundation.
And I think also, like, I mean, if you think of frequency as sort of the bottom to top thing, but you're also the king of the front to back, moving stuff out of the way with a little bit of reverb, a little bit of delay, and that kind of thing. You are so good at it, and still having, like, you could have lots of effects on the vocal, but there's still lots of effects on other things as well, and everybody is out of each other's way, but working together.
Yeah, depth, that's a whole different conversation on how we can achieve depth.
Yeah.
Not only that, but take it a step further on depth within each section, right? So we can apply width, depth, height to every song, but imagine within the song, each section having the three different, and how you manipulate that. Not for sonic purposes, but for that emotional roller coaster, right? That roller coaster has to have ups and downs. It just can't be that, like I said last time, a continuous drop. Because then you'll be bored. How do you ride a roller coaster? How do you mind fuck a listener to thinking that they're taking a mental break without even knowing it, so that next section you have them again, and that's what's going to make someone hit repeat. So there's a lot more psychology that goes into it, and we have the tools to hopefully apply some of those techniques, so that again we become invisible, but people want to hear that song again.
Yeah, and I think, again, another really good point is that it's easy to think that you'll get a mix to the point where, it just plays itself. But section to section, things have got to change. Filters come in and out, effects come in and out, and hopefully you don't even notice. But the chorus hits, and that's a really important thing.
And then that's when people tap their foot, they dance, they cry. Then now you've gotten an emotional, and it's there, by the way. It's there. When we get the song, we're so lucky we get some of the best producers and artists, and so we're definitely blessed to have good quality content. But our job is to even give it almost a shot of steroids here and there, so that it can be
exactly.
an exaggerated emotion.
Yeah, like when you hear the rough and you think, oh man, I really wish it did that. Well, you're not done till it does that.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Awesome. You got time for a couple more?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right.
Or to just talk about depth and mixes for hours.
No,
would be great.
You ask the questions that are in the list, Mark.
All right. Okay. This next one is from Dormanville, and he asks, has there ever been a time when a mastered version of your mix did not come out to your liking? And what do you listen for when a song is mastered by a mastering engineer? So what do you listen for when it comes back?
Early days of mastering were so frustrating, because it's mastering was, to me, a very creative art form. when I was, 25 years ago. It was like, it was creative because they had the tools to make it loud and give it some life and, things that we've been talking about. Now it's a level playing field because we have the same tools to make it loud, to make it exciting, and all that. So I feel like mastering has become a different type of process, the creative process. Now you don't need to slam it, you don't need to bring it up, you don't need to add width because of this, and that. And so I feel like in the early days it was frustrating because you work so long on a reverb trail that gave you a sense of whatever the emotion is, but you put a limiter and that thing goes away in the different type of emotion for that, right? Or if you have dynamics, you put a limiter, and then the dynamic is not as much, it's not as exaggerated, just like what we were saying a few minutes ago. So that took, man, I feel like there was a transition of many years that I didn't like 95% of the masters that came back, And it's very frustrating because you become friends with all the mastering guys, and it's tough to call them because the label's like, oh no, it doesn't sound the same, or it needs to sound. Can you just call them? And of course, we're like the bad guys. Are like, hey man, can we just do less? And some get very protective and like, I'm not doing anything. I'm like, well, you kind of are because I can hear it. So it's gotten so much better, and I always say, find a mastering engineer that understands your sound and what you're
Yep.
going for, as opposed to bashing, or experimenting. I mean, yeah, you should always experiment, but just know that if you have your 3 or 4 people that really, really know your sound, really know what you're going for, really understand your low end and your dynamics, and some of them just sprinkle a little dust here and there, then it's fine, and that's all it should be. Now, look, if I'm a 22 year old mixer that's still learning the process, then maybe a good mastering person will help that, but we have like the not 10,000 but the 30,000 hours, which we've done a lot, so there's a level of just experience that we have, that we don't need that much help at the end process, so those are the two buckets. And then experienced, you may really, really get some help from a mastering engineer. If you've done the 10,000 hours, you may need a lot less, and that's okay. So find yourself a mastering engineer that knows that about you.
Yeah, find someone who likes your mixes. That's the very first thing. But I think when it comes to like assessing the mastering, like how do you decide what to do about the mastering? Whenever we talk about the emotion and things, it almost sounds like we're trying to not talk about the gear, but it's the only fucking thing that matters. There was a record that I mixed and it got mastered, and sonically it hadn't changed a whole lot. They were pretty hands off with it, and the artist said, "Look, I don't know what to do with this because like it's just only slightly different. So how the hell do I even know?" And I just told her, "Take the song, just pick a song and just dance around the apartment while you listen to it and see which one is more fun to dance to." And it was like, bam, she knew immediately which version she wanted to use. Whereas when you sat and tried to be analytical, it was impossible to say. Absolutely impossible. But when it was, how do I react to it? Absolutely no question.
Yeah.
And that's what's important.
Yeah. That's a great way to say it. Like, just feel it, right? I mean, because we could analyze it, but if we don't feel it, then what's the point?
Yeah.
It's huge. Okay. That was definitely a highlight that sentence moment, but we'll keep going. Okay, so back to kind of reverbs a little bit. Another question from OH3. How do you get to understand your reverbs? How do you understand the room that you want to put something in?
Well, there's this great reverb called the Manny Marroquin reverb.
It's all you need.
That's all you need. What? It's like, why do you put delays and reverbs and some, and I go back to what we've been talking about. Is it, I always say, does it make it sound better or feel better, right? And most of the time it's one or the other. It's rare that it's both, but yeah, one. So for me, it's like, if I put a delay on something that wasn't a production call, I'm constantly helping maybe the production. Maybe there's a gap. Maybe there's a synth that doesn't play. Maybe there's something that we can kind of trick our minds into going and staying in the song. So I'll do that for, to kind of help the production, and reverbs is emotion as well. Like, there's maybe 20 things, maybe even more. And they go so fast that you do it almost subconsciously now because you've done it so many times. But what I would do if I were to slow the process down is like, okay, what are the lyrics like? Who is the artist? Is it an established artist? Is it a new artist? Did they try at what point of their career? Is this a fuck you moment for an artist, or is this a vulnerable moment? And you take all that information and all that data, and it kind of answers that question for you, So I'm not one to just put reverb just because the vocal needs reverb. There's got to be a good reason, and it's got to be like to the point that you brought up, like, hey, dance around and see which one makes you dance, you know, better or more or whatever. Well, that's kind of like the same thing. It's like close your eyes and what does that add to that emotion? And if it does, then fuck, then stick with it. If it gets in the way, then you're doing it for a sonic purpose. And for me, again, it's going to sound weird. For me, I'm not interested so much in sonics as much as people would think. I'm just not. I mean, because I've mixed records 20 years ago that I thought sounded amazing, and I listened to it a few years later and they sound like shit. you know. But I've worked on records that I felt this emotion 20 years ago, and if I play that record again, I get the same fucking emotion. So right there just proves that we're not here to make things sound better. That's a big misconception of what we do. Hopefully we're here to hopefully make it feel something. That's why we all got into this, because music makes us feel a certain thing and way, not because we love 10K on the hi-hat or 7K on the vocal, or we take 400 off a kick. That doesn't matter. It's like, we did it because we love how it makes us feel, and it's in our form that transports you to that moment in time. So that's what we try to do. I mean, that's how I pick reverbs, delays. What reverbs do I pick? Is it something that's going to help the production? And make a list of what those things are. And again, going back to the 10,000 hours, hopefully with time, you'll spend less time analyzing and more your gut telling you, and that's where we all want to be at. Where the gut I always say the gut should mix the song, not your head.
But real quickly, you boost 10K on a hi-hat, 7K on a vocal, and you take 400 hertz out of the kick. All right, we got that.
Next question.
All right. I think, look, there are so many songs that are super powerful with a bone dry vocal, and then there's songs that are super powerful with a ton of reverb on the vocal. One thing I would say if you're trying to learn reverbs is, like, if you work in Pro Tools, Revibe comes with Pro Tools. It's a great sounding reverb. It's free, and it's a modeling reverb, so it does springs, it does rooms, it does everything. So just stick with that one for a minute. Don't I need 500 plugins and whatever. And then I would say a plugin like yours is awesome, because otherwise, what happens otherwise is you just start thinking about reverb, and you don't think about pre and post processing the reverb. Like de-essing going into a reverb, well, that's sort of obvious. Filtering going into the reverb, oh yeah. But distorting after the reverb so you can actually hear it, that's really important. If you've got a dense track, you need a shitty reverb. You don't need a good reverb.
Exactly.
And you got to learn that.
That's where you go to the D-verb. And
exactly. I've got 2 vocal reverbs in my template, and one of them is D-verb, and the other one changes all the time.
Exactly. Love it. Yeah, so
awesome.
Should we do
one more?
Yeah, let's do one more.
All right.
Great. Okay. Another great question from OH3, and a good one to end on. What could you say in your whole time as an engineer was the most eye-opening thing that made you understand the process more?
Wow. Wait, ask that again, because that's actually one of those deep, like, let me think about.
Yeah, it might be unanswerable.
So what could you say in your whole time as an engineer was the most eye-opening thing that made you understand the process more?
It's funny because we've been actually talking about it for the last couple hours. Like, there's moments, going back to the Alicia moment, going back to, I know we'll talk about a John Mayer moment, the Kanye moments. I mean, I think there's honestly, I don't think we've it's a it's evolving at all times. So I don't know if I honestly if I even have an answer for that. It's just it could be something as simple as just listening to music, really listening to music and being a music fanatic. I think what happens in our as a mixer, and I just joked about being a fixer at times. We forget how to be music fans, and I think if anything, the realization, the constant reminder of having to be, not just wanting to be, having and wanting to be a music fan still when your hectic days of 12-hour day mix, you still should be a music fan. And I think that that will get you out of trouble throughout your career if you remind yourself, like, man, whenever I hear when the levee breaks, that brings me back to a moment in my life that I want to sort of recreate. When I hear, Umbrella, something that I worked on, and I remember the emotion that I had that day as a music fan, not as a mixer. And those will get you out of trouble. And those moments will, I do think you should have a playlist that says, if you're depressed, what songs would you play? Uh, and when you're depressed, fucking play those songs. And guess what? Next day you're gonna go in the studio clear headed because you're not depressed anymore. You're in the right state of mind. So we forget how powerful music is and how influential it is. And if I were to say, even though we talked about specific times in my career, but if I were to say what's the best way to become a better mixer is just by reminding yourself on how to be a fan, because you learn more from that than anything else. So
Well,
I
and
don't know.
I think it also goes back to what you're saying really early on tonight about having the confidence but not the arrogance. But it's being open to the moments that do happen. It would have been very easy to dismiss Alicia as some young girl who just doesn't know what the fuck's going on because you tune vocals, man, instead of it being this absolute life-changing moment. So it being open to it is what's important. The lesson itself almost doesn't matter. It's the ability to be open to getting that input and changing on the fly and doing it yourself without people having to tell you, like, dude, did you not notice you should have done this?
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it, man. I mean,
People are yelling preach in the comments over here. It's like
Yeah.
a motivational speaking thing for mix engineers.
Yeah,
It's
Manny,
amazing.
this is awesome again. So I'm going to immediately get in touch and we're going to find another Monday
do it. I'm down. I'm
and
down.
get
I
part
love
3. We might get done with part 4 before the end of the year at this rate. So that's
yeah,
good.
do it. I'd love. Like I said, if people are interested, then let's go.
They are interested. There's no
So.
question. And we've only made it up to 2005. So,
It's amazing. Well, thank you guys. Always, you're such a great time with you guys. So yeah, let's knock it out in a couple weeks.
all right. Awesome, man. I will be in touch.
Awesome.
So we will now wave and I'll mute and go to the thanks.